Welcome back everyone to Jface Games. I am Trent and we are here talking about building an RPG. It's been a little while, I know. What I've been doing is kind of rolling and testing the previous dice mechanic of the 3 dice, the stunt dice system with multiple dice, so you can check out that video if you haven't yet. And I really like it. I really like it. But I have one issue. And the one issue is that, is it too steep a bar for some people to enter? You know, if you're trying to get people that are first-time RPGers, that might be a little heavy, especially when you're wanting to focus on the RP elements and you're wanting to really make sure that they're invested in the combat and everything, that they're not too focused on the dice. So I wanted to take a stab at a alternative core mechanic. Now, I am not deciding between one or the other yet. I'm just throwing it out there, and to be honest, this one is a hodgepodge of ideas that have just come to my head recently, and I wanted to get it on video to kind of talk it out some, and then we can have people look at both mechanics and kind of get an idea of which one they like more. So the different one, I put Keyforge here. I mentioned this in another game or another video. It's a card game that I really like, but there's some things about it that are amazing, some things about it that are okay, but I want to try and emphasize one of the things that I think is amazing about it, and we're going to get to that in just a second. So first, you choose your role before you go. So we talked in another video about having, instead of having lots of like attributes, you have your backgrounds, which give you points or give you abilities to do skill checks, a la 13th Age, and then you have roles that you put points into, a la 4th edition D&D. Defender, Striker, Controller, I can't remember them. Defender, Striker, Controller, Leader. And I think I added another one in here that wasn't originally in, but I can't remember what it was. So anyways, you'd have these different roles. And then at the beginning of your turn, you have to choose what role you're in, right? And that's going to determine what you're able to do on your turn. And you do that before you even roll your dice, right? Because depending on if you hit or miss, depending on what role you're in, you can do different things. So say you miss and you're in defender mode, that might not be that bad because you have boosted defense and other abilities or different skills that you can tap into. Whereas if you're in striker mode and you miss, maybe it's not as conducive to benefiting you, you know what I mean? And maybe there'd be other like feats or things that allow you to switch roles on a miss, or, you know, maybe limited time or whatnot. But whatever the case is, you choose your role first, and that's kind of defining what you're going to do on your turn. So that's already got a little bit of the Keyforge element to it, right? Keyforge is a fantastic card game where, if you didn't see the previous videos, you don't know what Keyforge is that it's a 1v1 card game, and your deck is made up of 3 different houses, meaning that if you've got 30 cards, there are 10 cards per house, and you have 3 houses represented in your deck. So at any point in time of those 30 cards, you don't know what's going to be coming up in your hand. You might have 2 from one house, 3 from another house, or you might have, you know, 1-1-1 or something like that. Relatively, you have 5 cards in your hand. And what you're having to do on your turn is you can't just play all your cards. You have to choose which house you're going to activate. And what's so powerful about that is that it means that not only playing cards from your hand, you can only play from that house, but the cards you actually have down on the table, you can only play the cards of that house as well, to attack with, to do whatever. And so what's great is it eliminates resources. You don't have to worry about, oh, I've got to spend this to buy this, or use this to pay for that, or blah, 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 blah. It's your resource management is just, I'm choosing a house and then I'm going. And maybe I've made the right choice, maybe I haven't. And I like that. I like that you eliminate resources. So with that being more of a focus, eliminate resources and focusing on this, that means that you don't have to worry as much about the stunt point system, right? You don't have to have stunt points to power things, because just by being in a role, you've powered those abilities, so to speak. And then maybe it's, you can either activate an ability on a successful hit, or you can activate an ability on a miss. And even if you go into some of the other systems like Quest, where they have, you know, miss with an advantage versus straight miss versus hit, you could have 3 tiers of abilities technically. You could have some abilities that you're able to activate if you miss, but it's with advantage, or some abilities that you activate only if you completely miss, etc., or if you completely hit. So I kind of like that idea, making this more the focus. And so the thing is, not every character, these are going to be balanced. You know, as you level, you might just go all straight defender abilities. So you're going defender every round, right? So it's not as much of a choice. But hopefully the skill trees that are involved in each of these will draw people to diversifying to at least 2. Like, you're at least going to want to have 2 of them, and then you have at least a binary choice of some sort. All right. So few actions, right? You have a few, so you have these, and then you have a few actions to choose from. These are sort of your standard ones that you would see in a system, right? You have a move, you have an attack, you have a special, you have a reaction, and then you have a RPG action. That's the new one. So the idea is that I like, you know, to be honest, I like how, I love the Pathfinder 3 move, or 3 action system. But I like how D&D 5e does their move action, where it's just, look, I'm going to move, and I've got my full movement ability no matter what. So I can move 3 feet, do something, move back, you know, 3 more boxes, whatever the case is. I hate how in Pathfinder 2, now I get why they do it, because it's such a tight game about every action matters, but it's a real bummer when you have to use a move to go 5 feet, and then you have to move to go another 5 feet back. And it's, even if there's not enemies around that you're like stepping from, like you're using a stride to just go 5 feet so you can close that door, and then you're moving 5 back. It's just a real pisser. And that's just one of those things where I get that it makes the game tight, but I want players to have fun every turn. And that's even why I wanted to add this concept of you have a special action on your turn you can use, and you have an attack action, because I think you should always be able to just attack, straight up attack, right? And then maybe the special is something that, if certain abilities, they combine the 2 together and you then do something, whatever. But I like the idea of having that. Reaction's kind of standard. RPG action is the one to me that is very fast and loose, but I love the idea that on your turn, you have a designated action, a designated option to do an RP, sorry, it should just be RP, an RP thing on your turn, and if you don't, it's a wasted action, right? So meaning that you can just come up with whatever you want and roll a skill or whatever to try and make something happen in the story. And what's great about that is then you can design into the monsters. Every monster has a little like RP portion of their stat box where you have like 6 or 7 bullet points, maybe not 7, that's a lot, but 6 bullet points of things that could happen due to RP actions, right? Just giving, and they could be very generic. It's not like if you specifically grab the monster by the horns, it now gets disadvantaged. No, it just might be like things that are a little bit more simple, where it's like, this monster is susceptible to distractions, or this monster's, you know, whatever. You have some simple things just to give the DM something to latch onto. And there could be some little mechanics to it, where it says, if they do this, they get an extra attack. If they do this, they get an extra whatever. So there could be some mechanics attached to it, but it should be a little bit more vague in terms of where the hooks are for RP to actually affect it. And to be honest, I think that every monster should have some, well, that's a lie. No, I don't think that. But I think that there should be some monsters that have, you can defeat them through RP actions. If you rack up enough of them, you do, and they're tapping into the right stuff, right? So if I'm just constantly distraction, I'm trying to distract, that's not, you know, that's trying to get into a mechanic. And to be honest, I would have in there like only works twice or something like that. But if you got other RP stuff, like I'm going to try and grab the curtain, pull it down over the monster, or, you know, I'm going to try and, you know, read this text on the wall that I see, or the inscriptions on the monster's body that are running down its spine. I see these inscriptions. I'm going to try and read them out. And, you know, it means that you're not wasting a turn doing something, but hopefully the players feel like their RP matters and it taps into it. So this is the inception of this idea. I want to flesh it out more. I think there's some power there. Speaking of power, all powers are non-specific. A la, I keep saying a la. Why am I? I'm really into that right now. Open Legend. So if you remember the Open Legend video, they have this great character creation where you've just got all these sort of generic abilities. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means that by having more generic abilities, you have much more customization to how those abilities are represented in your character. So if you just have Blast 1, what that means is you have a distance damage of some sort. And that could be a bow and arrow, that could be a casting a spell, that could be a mind bullet, Tenacious D, almost said all of there. And so I like the idea that you start creating some abilities that are kind of generic in terms of what they do, with some subcategories off of them that then have maybe a little bit more specific triggers. So for instance, you have some sort of like absorb damage type ability, and that would be in the defensive tree. And then maybe like a spike off of it is like if you have a shield and you have this, it increases its potency. Or if you go off this track a little bit, now you can absorb damage for someone who's adjacent to you. Something along those lines. But the idea being, once again, that these don't have resources associated with them, right? You just have to be in the appropriate role to do it. Now, I could see the only thing being an issue with this whole role system is that if you have a very balanced party, and everyone has one of the roles and they just stay, or they have one role that's their primary and they just stay in that role. That could be an issue, but we'd have to play it to see how it pans out, because odds are if a monster attacks, you could have the monster just beelining towards like the striker, the caster, and if that person doesn't shift gears, doesn't have some form of defenses, like abjuration if it's a caster, then they might be SOL. So, yeah. Anyways, okay, Marvel Champions. It's a great card game, another Fantasy Flight card game. It has a really cool mechanic where what you have to do is you are a superhero, and you are either in your hero mode or your alter ego mode, and that's denoted by your card being flipped one way or the other. When you're in hero mode, you're attacking, you're fighting, you're in the mix. When you're in alter ego mode, you're healing up, and you're maybe like planning a little bit more, so to speak. And so how could this be represented in this game, in an RPG? Well, it wouldn't be represented the exact same way, because to be honest, some of the Marvel Champions, some of the only hits that people have about this mechanic, even though I think the mechanic's brilliant, some of the hits are, it's like, Steve Rogers, for instance, when he's Captain America, you're like, yeah, I'm Captain America, I'm fighting. And then all of a sudden it's like, Steve Rogers, and he's back in his apartment. And it's like you're fighting, Thanos, and it's not like you're just going to all of a sudden pop out to Thanos, I'll be right back. I'm going to go grab a brewski, sit on the couch for a moment, take these boots off and kind of let my bunions rest. That's not going to happen, right? So it kind of breaks the immersion. But maybe you could have actions that are tied to engaged versus unengaged. And you could say things like, if I'm certain distance away from monsters, because certain games have engaged versus unengaged, but it's more for positioning. It's more a concept of what's happening position-wise. But how it could be very interesting to think about, I have a whole different set of abilities that are available when I am unengaged versus engaged. And it probably takes up my attack slot. Like I'm not going to be able to attack. Instead, I'm using that for something else. So maybe you have a whole list of powers that are much more tied towards this sort of engaged versus unengaged concept, where you're kind of going passive versus aggressive. Something like that. And then finally, the dice roll. So I love the other stunt system, but this is getting away from the concept of stunt points in general. So it's just boiled down to the d20 plus the context dice plus the environmental dice. The idea being that you have multiple contexts and multiple environmental dice, and the DM chooses which one you're getting. So say there's 3 of these. If we just went super basic, maybe it's like neutral, player advantage, monster advantage for both. And they have a variable amount of pluses and minuses, and then you use a basic d20 system in terms of, 11 or higher is a hit, well, not necessarily like Quest where it's like 11 or higher is an auto hit. Monsters probably still have some form of an AC or target number or some sort. But then you have this environmental context dice, and you can try and do things RP-wise that could influence these. So maybe that's another way that RP action could influence these. However, I don't want that RP action to be too tied to mechanics. So anyways, this is the kind of... and the other thing I thought about is that maybe you still want some form of stunt dice, and instead you do a D20 plus D3s. But those D3s, in essence, they'd have to be custom dice, but those D3s, in essence, would be a 6-sided dice, where it's 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 0, instead of 1, 1. And then you could still have it be where, just like in the other system, where when you roll a 1 on a dice, it gives a point, in essence, for the DM to use for some sort. And this way, it's not a 33% chance the DM's going to get a point, but a 16, so it ties into the other math in the other game. And then you could end up rolling, I roll, a D20 plus 3D3 or something along those lines. So it's a thought. This is where the brain's been at for the last couple days. So let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.